person and the kind of ideas that I have, but also it influenced me to want to become a newspaper reporter, to be an investigator, to not believe authority, to check out, the bad guys and know that the world was a little bit crooked, but that was okay. That's the way the world works. And so now it's a real treat to be able to continue this series. This is not something that I would do for other writers. I have no yearning to write for the Robert Ludlum estate or for Michael Crichton or do Jurassic Park 3 or whatever. That's just not what I want to do. But when it was posed the question to me, would I be interested in continuing Spencer, I did not pause. I knew that there were more stories left for Spencer. I knew this was not a series that had run its course. This was not something that needed to end. And the way that I look at it is what a great tribute it is to Robert B. Parker that we're sitting here now, 5 years after his death, and we're still celebrating these characters that he created. And we still want more stories. I hope I'm as lucky as that with my own books, that when I'm gone, that people are still wanting more from those characters. So about 4 years ago, I was chosen by the estate to continue working on the Spencer novels, and I started spending a lot of time in Boston. It's a very key part of these books. If you're going to write about Spencer, Boston is ingrained in all of those stories. It's a huge part of that I've got to get right. So every few months, I'm in Boston, and I try to get the whole feeling of the town. The people, the town have been terrific to me. They've really opened up everything. Just talking about I'm working on a Spencer novel, that's all you have to say. You can get in with about anybody. About a month and a half ago, I wanted to find out more about the Boston Fire Department. I was working on a novel, I still am, about the Boston Fire Department, and I wanted to meet arson investigators. I was up there very quickly, hanging out at firehouses, meeting the commissioner, getting to go to some of the fire scenes, talking to arson investigators. The other thing that, of course, as you guys know, longtime Spencer fans, everybody wants you to eat at their restaurant.
Yeah.
And so when you go in, they all want you to mention Spencer ate at this restaurant. So that's not a bad gig. So, not only do I do the kind of research that allows me to, get the facts right as far as, whether it's the fire department or, it's the police department or whatever, I really want to get those details right. But in the same way, I got to get those food details right. So as much as I've got to do the investigative stuff and making sure the law enforcement stuff works, the court system stuff works, I got to know all the local beers, and I got to drink a little whiskey, and I've got to get in with the whole sense and the feeling of spirit of Spencer. This story, one thing I mentioned the other day to people is I said, I think when you're continuing writing something, the easiest answer that I have, people always ask me, is what do I think about continuing on someone else's creation? And I say, well, two things that I know that it's okay. First, Joan Parker, Bob's wife, who's a wonderful friend of mine and a terrific person, she wanted me to do this. So that's number one. The second thing is that Robert Parker himself worked for the Raymond Chandler estate and wrote 2 books with Philip Marlowe. So I know that he was good with this whole idea. And so I tell people, there are people, you can write Spencer books and you can rehash the old material and you can do kind of a facsimile of those books that we know and we love, that we've read over the years. But what I see my job is to find good stories. And I've got to come up with good things for Spencer to do. I think there's probably a lot of writers who could take these iconic characters and make them talk and walk and do things and kind of look in the way that Spencer used to look and what he used to do, and have a story that kind of looks like, the book Ceremony, and it has a character who's kind of like this. So it's kind of like, going down memory lane. But I want Spencer to move ahead, and so I find him the best possible stories to work on. And there's stories that if I wanted to, I could take those stories and make them work for other characters, but they're good, solid crime novels to get into. So this book, Kickback, is based on a true story. And when you guys get into the book and you read what happened, you're going to think there's no possible way this actually happened in America. You're going to think this is kind of far-fetched, it's unbelievable. It's about a kid who is accused of setting up like a fake Twitter page, a profile, for one of his principals, and it's just kind of a joke. He's just kind of making fun of one of his the administrators of the school. It's just kind of tongue-in-cheek. It's just, it's just kind of a gag, like we all did when we were kids. And he goes before a juvenile judge in Massachusetts, in this town that's based on a real town in Massachusetts, but it's fictionalized, called Blackburn, Massachusetts. And he's sentenced to a juvenile facility for nearly a year, just for doing this. And he's accused of, making threats against a school administrator. He's actually charged with terrorism, just crazy stuff. And this was really what was going on in this town in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. There were some judges in this town that were known as zero tolerance judges. They were sentencing kids for ridiculous crimes, one of them being a young lady. She was 16 years old. She set up a MySpace account for one of her teachers, and it was tongue-in-cheek. It was a joke. She got 7 months at a juvenile facility. And in this real case, what had happened, these kids that were getting sent away for these small infractions, just ridiculous stuff, were all from these 2 judges that were in this county. This facility was a private jail. This was run by a private corporation. This was not a state-run thing. We all know the dangers of private jails for adults, but when you have private jails for kids, it makes it even worse and more evil. What ended up happening is these two judges were making money connected to the guy who was the developer of this for-profit jail, and they were getting kickbacks from the scheme. So every kid that was getting sentenced, they were making more and more money from this whole thing, hence the title, Kickback. And when I heard about this particular case that was in Pennsylvania, I knew I had to write about it. And the more I started checking into it, I live in Oxford, Mississippi, and there was a similar case that happened nearby in a town in Mississippi where there were several young black teens that had been sentenced to a for-profit juvenile prison in Mississippi, that the conditions were horrific, just awful, terrible conditions for the kids to live in, dangerous things. And again, they were being sentenced because of leaving the classroom too early or not asking permission, and they were just getting these hardline judges. And again, these judges, it was always thought of that the judges in Mississippi had actually were making money on each one of these kids being sentenced. But the thing that happened in Pennsylvania was absolutely proven, and these judges were making all kinds of money. They actually had vacation homes down in Florida. They were they had fishing boats. They were just living up the life on the backs of these kids, and it just was so evil. I thought this is a Spencer story. This is the kind of thing that Spencer would get involved in, and I think it's really highlighted something that is a problem in this country, but it's very true to life. Not much said about this very dark story that Spencer gets into. There's still a lot of beer drinking. There's still plenty of fun. This was a very, I'd say, old school Spencer novel. To me, this kind of feels like what I wanted to do was like a Spencer book from the late 70s or the early 80s, where it's just really Spencer and Hawk doing battle with the baddies, and it's a really old-fashioned type Spencer adventure, although it happens in modern times. And part of the book takes place in Tampa, Florida, where these 2 judges that are from Blackburn, Mass. Have vacation homes. It seems like most of the people I met in Massachusetts in some way or another have connections to Florida. They've got something going on in Florida, and if they don't have a vacation home in Florida, they know somebody who does, or they're trying to get a vacation home in Florida. So I used to work as a newspaper reporter in Tampa, Florida, so I know that world very well. And I think I was also writing this novel while Boston was experiencing the worst winter that it had since like the Grant administration. And so I thought this was just perfect. Let's get these guys the hell out of Boston, because it was hard for them to to tail people in 6-foot snow drifts and that kind of thing and send them down to Tampa for a little while. But I'm very proud of the way this has worked out. I have been doing this now, coming up until the 5th year. So I was introduced the other night as, recently being selected by the Robert Parker estate to be continuing the Spencer novels, and now going into the 5th year and working on the 5th book. It's starting to become very comfortable, and it's a lot of fun for me. That's the best way to say it. It's a wonderful job to have, but I also take it very seriously. And I think hopefully what you guys will see is I love these characters as much as you do. So let's take some questions. We can talk about any kind of arcane questions that you have about Spencer. So yes, ma'am.
The first thing I want to say is thank you. I cannot tell you how wonderful it was to have
Thank you.
Spencer still with us.
And she is not a plant. She works for the publishing company. No, thank you so much. But I felt the same way. I didn't want to see it end. And every year, since I was a teenager, I used to wait for May. And in May, there was always that new Spencer novel. And I was very fortunate later on when I was older to work for the same publisher as Mr. Parker. And I would always get early editions, sometimes 6-7 months early before publication. And I was always so happy to get that new Spencer novel. I could not wait for it. And I think that's the other thing that's very unusual about this series, is this is not, people try to lump it in like this is the same thing as, taking over for James Bond or for, Jason Bourne or that kind of stuff as far as, iconic characters. But this wasn't a, reimagining, and this was not a bringing Spencer back. This was not, he never left. There was never a time that there was not a Spencer book, and I really cannot think of another thing that is similar to this. This was not like having to see how we can reinvent him and draw back. There was never a time and every year without a Spencer book. He always returned in May, and Bob's book came out, I think I may have these years wrong, 2011, his last book, and then mine came out in 2012, and so there was never a delay in the publishing. The Spencer books came out on time. But I'll tell you a funny anecdote, kind of a footnote to that, is when his final book came out, Six Kill, that was when it was announced by Putnam, the publisher, that this was not going to be the last book, that actually Spencer would continue, and that this guy, Ace Atkins, would be continuing the books, and he'd be writing these books. So people kind of conflated the idea that I had written Six Kill, and they thought that was actually my first book. So I got these really nasty letters through my website saying, if you think you can write like Robert B. Parker, you are sorely mistaken. This sounds nothing like Robert B. Parker. You've done a terrible job. And I thought to myself, I'm going to get critical letters from people, but if Robert Parker can't pull off being Robert Parker, but after I've been doing this now, coming up like I said, I'm working on the 5th book right now. The fans are really wonderful. And the true fans, the people who really love it, and they really know these characters, they've been reading these books for a long time, they're the most supportive people in the world. The only real cranks that I get about, this book doesn't sound like Parker or whatever, every single one of them, I'm telling you the truth, they all misspell Spencer's name. They said, I'm the biggest Spencer fan in the world, and you can't do this. I've been reading Spencer forever, and I know Spencer better than you. Spelled with a C. Other questions from you?
As some praise, I saw an interview once where Parker was asked to account for the popularity of his books, of the Spencer books, and he said he didn't know, but he thought people just liked the sound of them.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of an odd answer at the time.
Yeah.
But you've got that. I mean, the rhythm, the irony goes just so far and not too far.
Right.
It's not only the choice of words, but the tone of everything is remarkable.
Wow.
I was blown away the first one of yours I read.
I appreciate that very much. And again, another plant from the publisher. So.
Well, and your other series couldn't be more different.
It is very different.
I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's very different, and you're exactly right. That's a famous quote that Bob Parker gave, which he said, people like the sound of my writing. They said, what is the secret of Spencer?
Yeah.
And it's not the gunplay, and it's not the the crime itself. I mean, let's face it, sometimes some of the cases, I can't even remember what some of the cases are that he's working, but it's the way the story is told. And Parker really himself was a poet, and the way that he would structure those wonderful little chapters that he would write, it was also like, almost to me, like reading little poems. And he could be sitting in a car on a stakeout, and it could be raining, and he could be eating a donut, and he could be sitting in there with Pearl, who is still with us, by the way. And it was just like a lovely little scene, you know. So I learned a lot about writing from, as a young writer, reading Parker. And for me, if the Spencer story was going to continue, because these books are from Spencer's voice, they had to sound like it. They had to sound like it. They had to feel like a Spencer novel. And so I don't write like myself. So as you mentioned, you know, if you read my own books, I write crime novels that in some way are in the spirit of Parker, as far as having a heroic figure. We have the same type of ideals as having a hero who essentially is the Western hero. I think we all come from the same place, and we all believe in the same type of iconic American hero. But my writing style is very different. But again, if I'm going to write a Spencer novel, and I want fans to enjoy it, and if I want to enjoy it, it's got to sound like it. You know? So anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Actually, that leads to, you know, the first novel of yours, you know, your first Parker novel. Did you have it internalized, you know, so much that it was fairly easy to write like Parker, or has that gotten easier over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, as far as like how things have gone, as far as the changing and the approach. The first book, I had an idea pretty quickly as far as what the novel was going to be about. It was a story that I had kind of filed away for myself. I didn't know how I was going to use it. There was a story I'd actually helped out a group in Mississippi called the Innocence Project that works for wrongly accused people, and it was a story about a young woman, or not so young anymore, she was in her 20s, and came to the Innocence Project, and she said, look, my mother was murdered 8-9 years ago, and there was a man that was charged and convicted for it. And right now he is on death row. But he didn't do it. And I know he didn't do it because I saw my mother being dragged away from her home in the middle of the night, and I saw the men who did this. But the police would never listen to me because I was only a kid. And I thought, boy, what a story. What a story. You know, what is that story? Incredible. So I filed it away. I didn't know when I was going to use it. But then when it came up to write a Spencer, I thought, if I'm going to do this, we really got to kick butt in that first Spencer book. It's got to be a hell of a story. So I went to my A files and I said, let's pull the best story. It's a hell of a story. Worked out great, you know. And I changed it, of course, from Mississippi, from the South to South Boston. So it became Southie. But what I learned from, I think that the books are deceptively spare, and it looks simple the way that Parker would write. And I think that some people, they would look at the prose and they'd think, wow, you know, I could do that. That looks like something that's, you know, easily done. Look at all the white space. There's just a lot of dialogue and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I had a tremendous amount of respect for Parker before I started doing it. But then when I had to actually produce it and create a Spencer chapter, even if it's 2 pages or whatever, it was tough. And I had so much more respect for him when actually trying to do this, because it was really a process, not of writing, but of removing and taking it down, taking it down, taking it down. And I think the one thing that really helped me is my training as a newspaper reporter, as a journalist, is you don't have very much space to say a lot. And that's what Parker was really a master at. And of course his background, his training was really in advertising and writing ad copy and that kind of thing, and where the words are somewhat cheap and you got to get to the point. And I think that that's where those styles and that kind of thing, you know, nobody wants a long-winded Spencer. And nobody wants a 15-page chapter. You got to get to it really, really quickly. But so anyway, as things have progressed, and now I'm getting into the 5th book, it has gotten easier, and it does feel more comfortable, and it doesn't take me as long. But I've learned a lot about his process through, you know, I think he was notoriously flippant about it when people would ask him about how he worked and that kind of stuff. He goes, oh, I just sit down and I work and I write a few pages and then I'm done. And you know, but he was very good. He was really good. He was a true master. And so it's getting easier, but it still is a tough thing to emulate for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you cooking?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, my wife is here tonight. She knows what an incredible cook I am. All the burn stuff that I make, and, you know, it's just like Spencer. I order pizza. I bring home Chinese food. No, I do like to cook, and I've always liked to cook. But I think in some ways, because I've been reading Spencer since I was a teenager, I wanted, as a man, to be like Spencer. So I always thought that was a great thing. But it's funny, you know, you read those books, you know, these days to think about a man cooking, well, so what? You know, we all have the cooking channel, and, you know, everybody's watching, you know, whatever, diner, drive-ins, dives, and, you know, the cooking shows, all stuff. For everybody's a foodie these days, everybody's cooking. But in the 70s, when Spencer was cooking, it was an unusual thing for a man to change that role, and he was actually doing the cooking, and he was cooking for his girlfriend. That was not an expected thing. It was a little bit more edgy and a little bit more interesting. But I do like to cook. I still like to cook. I've always liked to cook, and I found that to be one of the pleasures of reading those books. And people ask me for recipes now. Yeah, so that's the good stuff. That's the good stuff.
Any chance of the series coming back on TV?
You know, that's a good question. I know that I like that TV show a lot. I don't know if you guys remember the Spencer for Hire TV show. You know, it's funny. Some audience, it depends on generationally who I'm speaking to, but they sometimes are like, I don't even remember that show. But when it was on, I mean, it was a big deal. It was a big deal, and I think in a lot of ways it really solidified Parker's career. I think it was something that was a major boost for him. And you know, we think about it now. We have 5,000 cable channels now, and how much we have on our. You know, back then, you had 3 networks, and that was it. And then once a week, you would see Spencer for Hire, and it would go across the screen. You had 3 networks, and you'd have a majority of America watching characters created by Robert B. Parker, the best-selling. I think it was like the best-selling Robert B. Parker. Anyway, I'm getting to your question about the inevitability of a Spencer TV show. Bob Parker famously would say he was not a fan of the show. And I think that, did you guys ever meet Parker? Did you ever see him talk? He would say, not a big fan of the show. But I'll tell you, seeing how TV shows get made and how things get changed in the process and how casting is usually terrible and how things were. I just recently, that show just last year got onto DVD. It just had a DVD release. And so I watched most of season 1. And I think the show's terrific. And I don't even think that show could be duplicated now for 2 reasons. I know Parker was not a big fan of Urich, but I don't really know any American actors right now who had the physicality of Urich. You know, he was a big guy, he was an ex-college football player, he was funny, he was charming. I mean, he was really good. Avery Brooks was terrific as Hawk. I mean, you know, when I think about writing Hawk, I think about Avery Brooks. He was amazing. And then the second part about that, not only was the casting really great, they shot the whole thing in Boston. I mean, they I don't know how they allowed it. I was watching something today where they were shooting in the burying grounds downtown, which is a really hollowed area in Boston. Like they're shooting a scene and the cops are trampling over the graves and bullets are ricocheting off the graves. Like, they would never allow that to happen. And it also would be a highly expensive shoot for that to happen. So I don't know. I think that if a show ever gets on TV, as far as a new Spencer for Hire, I would be very dubious about it, because I think it would, as disappointed as Parker was with Spencer for Hire, I think he was very fortunate how close it was to the source material, because it was pretty damn close. And I think that something was made today. I think it's going to be Spencer for Hire in, you know, Ottawa, you know, or something, and they're going to change Spencer in some way else, and they're going to change this, and they're going to try to make him 22 years old, and they're going to do. It's just not going to be the same. But I really like that show, and it's done well. I watched it. It was a new digital print, and I've actually got to know the guy who was the creator of the show, a guy named John Wilder, who was one of the creators of Streets of San Francisco years ago, and he was talking about getting that show on the air, and I think it's held up well, and it's amazing to watch. It doesn't seem that long ago, but Urich and Parker are both gone. Very strange.
Now, do you remember the 2-hour
movies?
special that he had on TV after the show had gone off?
The Spitz for Hire movies?
you remember who starred in that? Do you remember it?
You know Joe Montana, yeah, and those were shot in Canada.
Well, Parker said, "This is the Spencer I've always looked at,"
Yeah.
meaning a slim-built Italian guy. And I never understood that.
Well, I do understand that. You know, Montaigne still reads the Spencer books, and he has for years, and he does the audiobooks, and he's great. He's great, and I think what Parker liked about Montaigne is no, he did not have the physicality of Uric. He was not a big guy. He didn't look like Spencer. He didn't look like a boxer. He just, you know, he's from Chicago. But when he reads that character and when he performs that character, both in the TV movies, which I liked, except for they weren't set in Boston. They were supposed to be Boston, but it wasn't. He gets the rhythm of it right, and he gets the reading of it right, and his humor is very Parker-like, very Spencer-like, and I'm sure that's what Bob really liked, and I love to listen to him read the books. I think he is spot on, and I think he just got the character right, and even though he didn't look like a boxer, and he didn't look like a guy who's gonna, you know, beat the hell out of somebody, I think
Yeah,
he
Midwest
really...
cowboy
Yeah, right, yeah.
from the Queens of Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think he's from Cicero, Illinois, so he's got that kind of, yeah, right.
Knows this road.
Yeah, he's got that
Been there, done that.
Yeah, Al Capone was from there. Good. Well, other topics? Yes, sir.
Ace is an unusual name. Is it your nom de guerre? Nom de plume, rather?
No, it's actually my real name, believe it or not. It was my dad's name, and so I got that, but in a weird kind of connection with Robert Parker. Parker's nickname, people called him, was Ace. And years ago, when I was in college, my mom actually went to a book signing, but I couldn't attend because I was at school, and had Bob Parker sign a book for me. And she said, sign it to Ace. And he said, you know, I'm Ace too. And he said, I've been Ace. People called me Ace Parker for years. And my mom said, why did they call you Ace Parker? Where'd you get your nickname? My son was named after his dad. And he said he was named after, when he was a kid in college, after a ball player, a guy named Ace Parker, who is a very well-known NFL player, but he'd also played in Major League Baseball. He was quite the athlete back in the 40s. And in a weird kind of twist is, my mom said, she goes, I knew Ace Parker. My mom knew Ace Parker.
Wow.
And as a kid, I knew the original Ace Parker too. He worked with my dad. So it's just a very small, strange world how that stuff connects. Yeah, it really is. Well, guys, anything else?
Anyone
If not,
else?
I'll sign some books. And
Yeah.
we can talk as I sign. So thank you guys for coming out on a...
Thanks for coming here.